Mr. Carol Walker, should I start?
You are live and ready to go.
Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, distinguished guests and panelists. I am Dr. Sheila Caldwell, Southern Illinois University Vice President for Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as the Chief Diversity Officer. I would like to welcome each of you today as we close out our three-part series on perspectives on building, creating, sustaining, and expanding anti-racist initiatives across Southern Illinois University campuses. As a recap, part one was focused on critical steps to becoming an anti-racist higher education system, and that's featured on September 1st. Part two actually kicked off the Diversity Day for Southern Illinois University, our Edwardsville campus, and that was focused on perspectives on creating an anti-racist, equitable, diverse, and inclusive SIU. And it's worth noting that those perspectives included faculty, staff, and students. And that was featured on October 20th of this past year. And then today, we're actually closing out our series. And I'm so pleased that we have our diversity leaders who will be sharing their perspectives on creating, sustaining, and expanding anti-racist initiatives across all of our campuses. And all of these sessions will be available on our SIU System YouTube channel, which many of you all are streaming in live today. So you can review it or watch it for the first time. And I'm also very grateful for the audience members, because one of the ways that we have content that is of substance is to invite you all to participate and ask questions. So I would just like to say the first panelists will be responding to structured questions, but because we're very interested in the questions that you have, I would invite you to use the chat feature to ask any questions that you have, and we will make sure that we get to those in the last 30 minutes. So please, again, use the chat feature, and we look forward to engaging your questions. So again, I want to thank you for joining us today to what I would like to affirm will be a meaningful and interesting conversation of understanding. It is my privilege and honor to work with all of the leaders you see here today. We have vice chancellors, we have chief diversity officers, deans, and division leaders who are all championing anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are fearless, they are formidable, they are doing the daily work. They are the keeper of stories. Oftentimes they experience challenges while they're doing this work, but I think I can speak for all of them to say that we are very passionate and committed and honored to serve all of our campus constituents today. And so with that, I also would like to acknowledge another fearless leader, Dr. Dan Mahoney, who is also joining us today. He is our president, and I'm very grateful for his presence and his sustained commitment to anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so having said that, I would now like to, again, introduce our excellent leaders and panelists who have joined us today in alphabetical order. So first, I would like to start with Dr. Vanessa Brown from our Edwardsville campus. She serves as the Associate Athletic Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as the Chief Diversity Officer. Next, we have Dr. Lakeisha Butler, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the SIU School of Pharmacy. And now we have Dr. Wendy Elamine, our Associate Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the School of Medicine. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Paul Frazier, who actually joined when I joined in July of this past year. He is our Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion on our Carbondale campus. And then we have Dr. Jessica Harris, who serves as our Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion on our Edwardsville campus. So thank you for joining us today. And then I would like to introduce Mr. Mike Ruiz, who is our Assistant Dean for the School of Law. So very pleased to hear your perspective and appreciate you joining us. And last but not least, a great leader, I think he served more than anybody, probably over 30 years. We have Dr. Pernell Thomas, Chief Diversity Officer, who I also view as a mentor and just really appreciate his expertise, his generosity with his knowledge and his leadership over many years. He is the CDO for the SIU School of Dental Medicine. So thank you for being here today, Dr. Thomas. And so one of the things I would like to do next is really just dive into it. We have several panelists, and I'm personally eager to hear their perspective. So I'm going to start with Dr. Harris. And if you can answer the first question, if you could just share your vision for the Edwardsville campus as far as what you plan to do to create, sustain, and expand anti-racist initiatives on your campus for Edwardsville.
Sure, and thank you so much, Dr. Caldwell. It's a pleasure to serve on the panel. My vision for creating, sustaining, and expanding anti-racist initiatives on the Edwardsville campus, I would say it's primarily grounded in the concept of understanding. It's really difficult, from my vantage point, to solve a problem or to address an issue if you don't fully comprehend what it is. So anti-racist initiatives, whether newly created or the expansion of existing initiatives, have to be informed by a deep awareness and understanding of what systemic racism is and how it functions. And so broadly, and I think this is why education and development is so critical. So this might include a sort of broad understanding of the development of the history of racism in the United States. That might also include, more specifically, some understanding and knowledge and awareness raising around the history of racism in higher education. And I also would add that it might involve opportunities for members of the community to engage in some personal reflection about their own socialization around race. But I think all of that together, that knowledge, whether it be historical in terms of the nation, historical in terms of the institution, personal understanding of who we are and our identities, all of that I think is critical to shaping our lens and perspective in ways that allow us to properly identify injustice and inequity and shape our responses to it. I think this is especially important in terms of all of the work, but particularly the work that we're engaging in East St. Louis, and sort of understanding our historical relationship with the residents in that community, and moving forward as an institution, what our responsibility is to reinvest and to invest in the folks there. But I did a presentation earlier this year. It was probably January, February of this year. And I shared with the audience some data points from the SIUE's 2020 fact book. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to challenge the audience to not just see numbers, but to understand that there are stories behind the numbers and there are whys behind the numbers. And so, for instance, on one of the slides, I indicated that there was a 16-point gap between the percentage of Black students who entered in 2013 who graduated in 6 years and the overall number. And so there are very clearly some whys behind why that gap exists. And so although the whys may vary in terms of the inequity that persists on the campus, it's important to position ourselves to not only be able to recognize injustice and inequity, but to identify the root causes, again, so that we can address them adequately and with intention. So for me, understanding and knowledge opens the door to critical reflection and contextualization, which for me is really essential to enacting any sort of anti-racist initiative at the institution.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I appreciate you really unpacking that, but I just want to affirm what you said is that we do have to have knowledge of our history. We have to have knowledge of the data, because they do tell a story and they do really impact why we are where we are today. And without that knowledge, we'll keep asking why, but that's part of why we're all here, to educate our communities and make sure that they understand how the past has relevance today and how it's transformed and shaped our institutions. So I appreciate that. And now I would like to offer the same question to Dr. Elamine, if you could share your vision for creating, sustaining, and expanding anti-racist initiatives, and also if you would like to share anything else about your background, that would be helpful as well. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on this panel today. I am an Associate Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, but prior to this, I started off as a family physician. So I am doing this position with a different lens as a family physician, and I'm also an equity academic strategist. So one of the things that I feel like it's important for us to do if we're really to have sustainability is to make sure that we have the right people that are involved. And when I say the right people involved, that's every single person who is on our campus plays a role. and making sure that we're able to transform the environment that we're in. Our dean has declared that we would be an anti-racist institution back in May 2019. And so this really provided us with a strong foundation. My predecessor, Dr. McNeese, laid a really strong foundation so that we could really move off into a different direction when Dr. Mahoney said that each campus will have an anti-racism task force. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to organize ourselves in a way so that we have an infrastructure that is sustainable. So our anti-racism task force has 4 different areas that we're trying to focus on. We have metrics. So we're looking at accountability. We're trying to unearth that data that is connected to the stories that Dr. Harris was talking about. We're also looking at organizational analysis. How is our community of medicine landing on individuals? How are we going to increase recruitment and retention unless people are feeling like they are part of an inclusive environment that honors and respects their humanity? We're also focusing on training. And I think that this is a really critical piece, because as we're doing this training, we're trying to do it with a trauma-informed lens. And we're also trying to make sure that we're creating the critical psychological safety that allows people to step back and be vulnerable and to be in a space where they can really evaluate how their past lived experience has impacted the lens. And then our last group is looking at policies and procedures. I think one of the things that is different about the School of Medicine is that if we are not an anti-racist institution, this could be life or death for individuals. And this creates a different level of urgency that we take very seriously, so that we're always trying to operate in our integrity. But the entire nation around medicine is really in this movement of looking at what is our medical history? How have we played a role with everything from experimentation? I mean, we have labs right now that are starting to be changed that were race-based. And now we're saying we have to practice medicine in a race-conscious way, and to understand that it is not race that is perpetuating health inequities, that it's racism that's perpetuating that. So our anti-racist efforts, the sustainability is having equity ambassadors inside each one of our departments. And it's also having an anti-bias curriculum committee. So many of our professors are actively looking at ways to be more inclusive, but to make sure that we're removing the stereotypes so that we're not perpetuating some of the things that have been passed on through the medical legacy.
Thank you. That was very thorough. I appreciate that holistic approach. You talked about people, programs, policies. So it was really helpful to hear your perspective from a physician. And again, like you said, it is life and death. So that was very helpful. Thank you, Dr. Elamine. And now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Frazier from our Carbondale campus. Same question.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. We are in the beginning stages of launching a strategic plan for the entire campus, with one of the pillars being diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as far as seeing that through an anti-racism lens, my goal is to kind of take that on in 4 pillars, as my other 2 colleagues said, that we start with what we do for students, what we do for staff, faculty, and what we do in the community. And we work from outward in doing that. And so some of the things that we look to examine, and actually we're planning an event. I would like to invite all of you to an event in January where we'll have kind of professional development around that. Like what does that mean for our individual areas and for the campus as a whole? Because I feel like we need some listening sessions around that first, to decide and redefine what diversity means to us as an institution, and then define what anti-racism means and what our approach is going to be for it as a whole. We have not had an opportunity to do that yet, but that's going to be beneficial as we move forward.
Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing more about that event. So that sounds exciting. So thank you for planning that for the campus. And now I would like to move to Dr. Brown, Vanessa Brown, same question.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be on the panel, be a part of this, this so much needed conversation. Our athletic director here, Tim Hall, has been very clear that we're going to be an anti-racist department. And so that's exciting to work for and work with him. My vision is to ensure that every member in our athletic family has an opportunity to go on a personal journey. I think this is all personal, and it all has to be about how we see ourselves in this whole mosaic and this whole part of what's happening in our country and the change that we need to be. And to ask themselves the question, who am I? How did my ancestors migrate to America? What were their stories on their journey? How did we gain certain privileges? What will I do with my privileges? What will my dash read? These questions, to me, will give them the opportunity to explore history in a way that is personal and also a view into the making of America. And some of the roles of the illusions of social constructions of issues like race and the systemic oppressions designed to keep us apart and separated. It is my goal also to, design, develop, and implement in collaboration with our campus and community partners, a working model of what we've started here is a Cougars as One initiative that focuses on the student athletes and also our collective contributions of all the members in the athletic community. We want to do those through actions performed in the spirit of our commitment as an institution to anti-racism and inclusive excellence. But what we say around here in athletics all the time is that we will bring life to the ideal that we're in it to win it. We constantly talk about being in it to win it. And so we know that that doesn't just mean on the court or on the course or different things. It means across the board in our life. And our students leave here as change agents. It is also one of my goals to provide strategic direction, to create a department that promotes a deep understanding of and enthusiasm for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and be intentional about supporting all members of our community, no matter where they're from. We have a variety of processes and programs that are underway to strengthen the sense of belonging that's felt by all our members, no matter, no matter where they're from. Finally, is also my vision to create an environment that provides for the overall well-being. Many of our students are experiencing mental health issues and other issues around relationship building, and how do we begin to really take a look at the whole student athlete and every member in our community here. I think we recognize the diversity. I think that if we recognize that diversity is what has made America strong. Also the critical need to be aware of our past, but willing to move from the past and develop equitable and policy practices, and that every voice counts. If we're going to be a model for future generations in the world, we've got to listen to everybody. Everybody has a stake in us being a better place. Athletics, SIUE athletics is both proud of its historical accomplishments and the fact that it is committed to a rich domestic diversity, our international flavor, our national and regional academic and graduation accomplishments. But more importantly, I think when we start thinking about competitiveness and what does that mean, I think we look at it as competitiveness on and off the court, that we will be known for our student athletes leaving SIUE with a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and as change agents in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. One of the things I'm hearing consistency, I've heard the word all from all of our panelists, because I think one of the things we want to impart, even as the diversity leaders do this work, we recognize that we can't do it without everyone. And then our commitment is that everyone feels included. I've heard inclusion and sense of belonging from our panelists. And I think another operative word has been history. So again, history, not just for the sake of looking into the past, but understanding how history is still very much prevalent today and it impacts all the ways we operate structurally, in our systems policy. So again, those are some consistent things that I heard. And so I appreciate you highlighting that as well. And now I will turn it over to Mr. Ruiz, and he's going to share his vision for the law school. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me on. I think what you heard basically is a continuum of things that everyone sort of needs to do. And so you start out by doing some kind of diversity survey. We've done one of those here at the law school. Maybe you hold a town hall. You definitely want to have at some point listening sessions to identify where the problems are. And those are things we need to keep doing here at the law school. And then maybe hopefully you follow it up with some training, a discussion. But what I want to talk about in my time here is that step that comes next. And it's the reason why most people, I think, go to law school. It's why people look at lawyers as the people that hopefully will lead the change that needs to be made. And that is focusing on these skills of persuasion and problem solving. I think that we've all become really good at arguing and talking. Commenting has become a worldwide skill, but we're losing the skills of persuasion and problem solving. I think if we're going to make advancements in this area, that's where, at least at the law school, we need to be training people to do that. And so that means supporting our students, right? We can't have a top-down approach. People are going to expect that law students who are going to be lawyers are going to be the leaders in their community, who are going to pass the laws and create the policies that make the changes that people want. And so what we're trying to do here at the law school, and I would hope that my vision would be, is that we would have labs, we would have assignments in class that focus on these topics and teach the skills and give students the opportunity to use the skills they need to effectuate the change that they want to make. And that may be done here just on campus, or maybe in conjunction with local communities, by providing a free service to the Southern Illinois area to help come in and help draft changes or create policies that will make them more anti-racist institution. But I think at the law school, we have a high standard, and the standard is that the people, a lot of problems are going to end up at your door, and we have alums who are judges and who are politicians, and they can't just pass this on to someone else. And so we have to prepare them for that here at the School of Law, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Perez. I love that persuasion and problem solving. I think for those of you who are engaged today, I think one of the questions we should all ask ourselves as we talk about anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion is what's in it for me? And I think if we was really to think about the pros of what's in it for me, what's in it for all of us is a better community, a better SIU, and a better America. So I think we can literally unpack that. So I really appreciate that unique perspective from the law school and the questions that we need to answer for ourselves as we engage in this work. And now I'm gonna close this particular question out with Dr. Butler, and I look forward to hearing her perspective from the pharmacy school and her leadership. So Dr. Butler, same question.
All right, so thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel. My colleagues have provided some great insight, which is very similar to what my vision is at the School of Pharmacy. So I will highlight a few things that they've already stated, but a few others as well. So specifically, the important piece for me is holding the leaders accountable, especially those with power and influence accountable. And so I wholeheartedly believe that it starts with the leaders truly being committed. And so making sure that that is truly a fact. Additionally, being data driven. So that's been an important piece that I've been working on most recently, just assessing where we are. And so, I've utilized a spectrum assessment. It's called the Meyer DEI, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Spectrum Assessment, to determine, where we are as an organization on this DEI journey and to identify potential areas for future work. And I presented that to my colleagues so that they can see where we are. And really hone in on those particular areas that they thought we might have been doing well in, but we're really not so far along on that particular spectrum. Keeping this at the forefront. And so we have weekly times and spaces for us to be educated, the faculty and staff to be educated in this particular area. And so to really piggyback on what's already been stated, the importance of educating and increasing and enhancing the knowledge of all of those that are a part of the School of Pharmacy. And so not just our students, we certainly are focusing in on the curriculum, but we as faculty have to be prepared to also be role models and be knowledgeable as well. Another piece that has already been discussed is really those policies and procedures. And so there's a book that's titled Erasing Institutional Bias. And the authors talk about the importance of deconstructing subjective processes and reconstructing them with objectivity. And so that's been another focus, and that's a vision of mine as well as relates to policies and procedures. And so we're looking at admissions policies, hiring, the curriculum, promotion and tenure, a lot of the policies that really help to run the school forward. And then finally, for me, we've talked about the people. I think that is so critical. And so not just the leaders, but we are made up of people as a school. And so developing a collective group of what I like to call accomplices. So we hear a lot about allies and allyship, but I like to more so use the word accomplice, because I know that I can't do the work alone. And I've also accepted that not everyone will receive the message from me. And so the importance of, having someone that may look like the majority leading our DEI committee, the actions of an accomplice. So just to kind of, define what an accomplice is, they are meant to directly challenge institutionalized racism, colonization, and white supremacy by blocking or impeding racist individuals, policies, and structures. And so that's a big task, a tall task to have. And so I'm really trying to develop the individuals here. And so having a collective, and so it becomes a domino effect where this is who we are. And you may have some stragglers, but the majority of individuals are serving as accomplices.
Dr. Butler, I appreciate that additional word, specifically through the lens of anti-racism, adding that to our lexicon. So, so many other words. So thank you for that. And I also appreciate the highlights, just specifically as far as looking at policies as relates to promotion, hiring, retention. I think, again, that's another common element that we all have in common as we try to do this work. We do want to monitor very specific benchmarks. So I appreciate you highlighting that as well. And so now as we move to our next question, this particular one, I would like to start with Dr. Brown. And if you could share about your the greatest opportunity or barrier that you are encountering as you lead anti-racism work on the Edwardsville campus, specifically in the athletic department. And basically, how are you stepping into that opportunity, and what are some of the things you're doing to overcome the challenges in your role as a leader?
Excuse me, before you go to that, can I reiterate that question number one?
Oh, I am so sorry, Dr.
That's
Thomas.
right.
Please
That's
forgive
okay, unless there's a time factor. Yeah.
Okay, yes, I apologize about that oversight. And Dr. Thomas, if you could please share your vision for the School of Dental Medicine about creating, sustaining, and expanding anti-racism.
Okay, and I'll be brief because, a lot of these things have been spoken. I did like Dr. Elamine and Dr. Butler being in medicine and pharmacy, me being in dental, it's so many things are similar. But my vision also would be to create and sustain an environment that's welcoming. We always talk about a welcoming environment. And as Dr. Ruiz has said, dealing with the top-down approach or even from the bottom up, when we look at administration, faculty, students, and staff, when we do our climate surveys and those type of things. One thing with our surveys is that, and we all do them, and we find information, then it's kind of like, okay, now what are you going to do with this information that you receive? So we have to look at that, look at our policies, look at our procedures, evaluate those procedures that you come up with, and then you have to change with the times. We can't do things like we always have done, and so we have to change those. So my other thing would look at our vision. I know in dentistry, it's evidence-based dentistry in our education, but we have to have an environment that's inclusive, and offers inclusivity and respect. And we have to do that from day one. We have to get our students to buy in, our staff to buy in, and our faculty to buy in. So I would say have a humanistic kind of pedagogy that inculcates respect, tolerance, understanding, and concern for others, and foster mentoring and advising things with that. I always say, in my mantra, just like I know that Dr. Vanessa Brown has her mantra, is to lower barriers, not standards. Okay. So I think that's important. It's important for all of us to do to move forward. So thanks for the time. I think that what got me into this from day one is when I started as a faculty member right out of dental school. There weren't that many faculty members like me, and the students just came around, and my thing was telling them that you can do this, you can achieve. So in some instances, they're out there. There's people like us that are out there, and I think Dr. Harris had talked about that in the past when she came down and did a talk for the dental school. But if another thing that we can do is create our own. If you're not going to treat your present students, faculty or staff with respect and honor what they're here for and all the things that they do, you're going to lose them. We don't want to lose good people. And we want our students that, talk to them about being faculty members someday. Maybe they can be change agents to do the work that needs to go forward. So thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. There was a couple of things that you said that stood out to me. I've heard you speak about your mantra, lowering barriers and not standards. And I think that is what anti-racism work is all about. And then also, like you said, the humanistic approach, just welcoming, respecting people, listening to understand. Those are things that we're often taught, like as very young children in elementary school, practically when we come out of the womb. And so as you kind of mentioned those specific characteristics, once again, it just reinforces the fact that everyone can do this work. In a lot of ways, we already have done the work of respecting, welcoming people. It's just a matter of who we offer that to. And if we can use our imaginations to offer it to everyone and not, people who necessarily look like us or who are the majority group. I think that's really what we're asking, is what we do for some that we do for all. So that was a much needed perspective. So thank you for sharing that. Okay. And so as we go to the second question, I'm going to start again with Dr. Brown. And if we could talk about your greatest opportunities and barriers that you've had to encounter as you do diversity work.
Great, thank you. One of the things I think about sports, I think sports is a natural when it comes to in this space and the work. And there's been a lot of trailblazers on the journey in sports and improvements in sports around DEI. So one of the things that we have is a great here in athletics now is a great opportunity to work with our community partners, to work with other people that have really on this journey of doing this work that are outside of higher education. And so a current opportunity that we have is SIUE Athletics is to partner with the Jackie Joyner Kersee Foundation to develop a freshman student athlete winning in life academy that will allow every student athlete that come to us to begin their journey of winning across all spectrums of their life, on and off the court, the course, the track, the field, where we would integrate diversity and inclusion across them, just beginning to start that personal journey. What does it mean? Some of the questions I asked in question one is, what does it mean? Who am I in this work? What is my purpose? What should I be doing? How do I win across in my life? And how do I leave here knowing what that means and being the change agent that I wanted to be? The Jackie Joyner Winning in Life, I'm not sure if many of you have heard of it, but it's a 4-part series. And the fourth part of that series is around college student athletes development. What we would do is designed to teach very principles that Jackie Joyner Kersee had identified, and what helped her as she became the woman she was throughout sports and all of that. And it has, it's been around over 25 years. She's been delivering it through the East St. Louis, through the Jackie Dornan Foundation and the center in East St. Louis. And this just gives us an opportunity, and our student athletes, to go, when they come in the door, to really understand those principles across their life, but also have an opportunity to do an experimental part, is to practice some of those principles and work with, young people from age 4 to 12 to really kind of take a look at their communities and the different things they're going through, and really kind of teach some of those early life skills that they learned on winning, and now are using that to transcend when they come in to college. And so really the purpose of this, the college student, the development program, the academy we want to develop, the purpose of that is to really just to give them, as I said, give coaches, give administrators a comprehensive resource to deliver lessons that support overall student athlete development. As I said earlier, we want our student athletes to leave with a full sense of self and belonging, not only in this program, but really understanding their purpose for the world and what they're going to do and how they're going to be change agents. So this is a great opportunity. At this point, I really don't see any barriers. I think it's just an opportunity to really give us to get our student athletes, when they come in the door, out into the community. Also have an opportunity to have a national presence with Jackie and the work that she's done, and the life skills to pass her, opportunity to pass her journey on to our students, and that they begin to pass that on to other younger people, and that it just continues to grow. So I really don't see any barriers at this time, but I think it's going to be a great partnership, a great opportunity for us to when freshmen right in the door, when they come in the door at SIUE as an athlete, they know what it means to win across all spectrums of their life. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, very exciting. Thank you for talking about that very specific connection that our students have an opportunity to, from a very outstanding athlete too. Her history precedes her as well. So thank you for sharing that. And now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Butler. If again, you could talk about some greatest opportunities as well as challenges as you do work in the School of Pharmacy.
Yes, so I think that I've kind of talked on the greatest opportunity. The greatest opportunity is to create that collective of individuals who are committed to going on this journey together, to evolve personally and professionally. We've had this consistent theme of it does take all of us, and I think that is really what I'm most excited about, that there are new faces at the table when we're discussing and really honing in on this work. And so that's definitely been an opportunity that I've worked to capitalize on and continue to expand upon that. As it relates to barriers, I think one of the barriers that I have experienced is really trying to shift the focus or deflecting the attention from, I like to use the analogy from the burning house to another house that may need some repairs. So, saying don't forget about this group or that particular group. So, we certainly want to be very inclusive, but we also want to be very realistic and understand the history that we are facing and the contemporary injustices that we are facing. And so that's been really a barrier. So that's where the education piece comes in, to make sure that everyone understands that we don't want to deflect the attention from really the lives or individuals that are being extensively marginalized within our program. And so that's particularly a barrier that comes to mind.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. I just wanted to quickly affirm that. And I think it's also helpful as I speak to the work I do as a system office. The way I'm going to deal with that barrier, because I agree it's a barrier and I've had to engage that specific issue, is that we talk a lot about data and making data-driven decisions and letting the data tell the story and using that to inform the work we do. And so when I think about how we're going to, as one individual who work with campus constituents all across to help solve the problem, it goes back to what Dean Ruiz said, is that we are using our platforms to solve problems. And when the data highlights certain groups or areas that have the most challenging problems, that is how we will approach the work. So we're not being hired to focus on problems that are really not issues, that are not pressing issues. And so we're going to use our efforts, our energy, and our time to look at the data and say the data is showing that this particular group doesn't have the graduation data. This particular group is not being promoted. This particular group is not being hired. And when the data tells us that, that's where we will spend our energy. And if we also get more data that shows this area is also an issue, we will divert our time and energy to that. But that is how we will move forward as far as problem solving this work. So thank you for highlighting that challenge. And I know the challenge, and we all encounter that from time to time. So the same question I would now like to present to Dr. Elamine.
One of the places that I have seen a profound opportunity is within our curriculum. And what I have loved is that you've had many different individuals come forward and say, oh, I can see where I can contribute this expertise around a particular marginalized group of individuals, to be able to embed that within our curriculum. Another opportunity that I have seen is what we're calling micro-learning, where if we have a faculty meeting, we have a little bit of micro-learning within that faculty meeting around anti-racism, equity, diversity, inclusion. So people actually coming forward and saying, you know what, I have some space for a micro-learning, can you come to that? And so it's a way for us to kind of embed within as opposed to being siloed, which I think that historically work around equity, diversity, and inclusion has been. And then another opportunity are our students. Our students are amazing. And I think that they're out in front of the leading many of these, the movement that we're seeing right now. And I love that they are vocal, and we're trying to make sure that we're being responsive to what they're experiencing. I think that one of the surprises for those of us that are physicians is sometimes the bias comes from the patient. And we have to create policies that allow our students, our residents, and our faculty to be supported in that space. So one of the barriers that I want to bring up that may be a little bit different is the psychological barrier. I think that sometimes when we're trying to expose certain things, resistance shows up in different ways. Sometimes the resistance shows up with questioning everything. Sometimes it shows up with becoming defensive. And I think we have to recognize that sometimes people are stuck in that trauma response where it's either fight, flight, or freeze, where they can't say anything at all. And we're seeing that when we're addressing some of these issues. So I think that we have to move past that barrier by developing that psychological safety that's so needed to be able to step back and say, you know what, I made a mistake. I should have approached this differently. That's not what I intended. I see the impact. And let's just give people that space to do that and move on. But in medicine, people don't like to be wrong, and they don't like to, because most of the time it can end up into a really bad situation, but we have to create that space for people to try new things, to learn that new lexicon, to get it wrong, but then come back and get it right.
Thank you so much. And I think that this is the perfect environment to provide that space. And I would also use the word grace as well, because we do all fall short. We do make mistakes. And I think that the more we can extend grace and understanding, the further along we're going to get in this work. If people don't feel like they have to be defensive, or they're scared to ask questions, or they're scared to make mistakes, we want to learn from those mistakes. But at the same time, we do want to cultivate a space where there is freedom to engage, to interact, and to learn from one another. So thank you for sharing that perspective. And I think it was super important as we all talk about the pandemic and mental wellness. That's another part of our health and mental wellness. So I appreciate that, Dr. Elamine. Next, I would actually like to go to Dr. Thomas. If you could share the same response, just different greatest opportunities or challenges as you lead the diversity work at the School of Dental Medicine.
Okay, caught me off guard. I had to unmute myself here. Thanks. You know, we're not where we've been and we're not where we need to be, but we always strive to do better. You know, we can, as we've talked about all this, we can learn through our history. And basically what we need to do is to think ahead. You know, you have to have a climate that fosters humility, proficiency, effectiveness, sensitivity, and responsiveness. I mean, those are the type of things that I think that we need to do. We have an opportunity to listen, you know, rather than act on things. You know, so many times it's just like in treating our patients, that rather than go in and just start, you know, on, let's say as a dentist, well, this is my denture patient. This is my crown and bridge patient. Well, that patient has a name. You start with a name, you talk to them, you find out what's going on. Sometimes, you know, before you just dive into the work, you're talking, you know. And so I think you need to do, you talk to your patients in what we have to do, but you also listen, you know. So some barriers that I think that come up is when we talk about training and those type of things is not everyone's on the same page. You know, you've got some individuals that, you know, they feel that the work that we do in diversity, education, and wellness and inclusion and that is not important, you know, and we know about microaggressions being intentional or unintentional. You know, we've got to get folks on the same page and get them to realize what's going on. You know, if you go through history, you know, when I was in dental school, and I didn't go to the School of Dental Medicine here, but there were, like, in our class, maybe 10% of the class were women. Well, now over half the class are women, you know, and but we have to have the equity piece to make sure that those women are in education, those women can achieve, those women can move forward, and minorities can move forward and achieve, and those sort of things. So there's barriers that exist, and we just have to overcome those. And a lot of that is dealing with our leadership, learning from that, and doing the things that we need to do to move forward. Training is key. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. I agree. And what I just want to use one word to describe what you spoke of, and that's dignity. And I think that's another big part of our work is restoring dignity and making sure that all the, you know, like you said, patients or faculty, staff, and students we interact with, that they feel free to be fully free, fully human, and have a dignified experience. So thank you for sharing that. And now I'd like to have the same question be answered by Dr. Frazier.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. You know, I think for me, the biggest barrier has been time. I feel like I needed to be here in May and not in July because everything is just so new. And so the opportunities are there, but I don't think we've had the time to spend together to get things up and running. I mean, we've had a great first semester. I have, with the exceptions of a few tragic events that have kind of engulfed our campus this semester. And so I think that's been an opportunity because we've had to spend time together to kind of help heal with each other. But it's been a barrier because we've only worked on that one thing. And so I think in the spring, as we have time and we have more listening sessions, but then we able to put some things into action. I think it's going to be beneficial for SIUC. We just hadn't had the time needed to kind of implement some things.
Thank you for sharing that. I see a lot of people shaking their heads because One of the things I think we've all heard from our panelists today is that they're very strategic. But one of the things that is worth noting about diversity work is that I would say, if I had to even ascribe a specific percentage, I would say about 25 to 30% of this job is reactionary. I've done it 3 different times at different institutions, and as different incidents come up, crisis situations or things happening with faculty and staff, we literally stop what we're doing and we divert our attention to those pressing issues, because people are the most important in the work that we do. So if someone is being traumatized, or if it's something that is catalytic that is happening across the campus, oftentimes our expertise is being invited to mitigate or problem solve that situation with a whole group of people or even the individual. So I know Dr. Frazier, with just some of the tragedies, unfortunate tragedies that have happened beyond your control and others, you've had to engage in that. So I do time is a big factor as we approach this work. So thank you for sharing that. And now, Dr. Harris, if you can respond as well as far as opportunities and challenges.
Sure. So I believe strongly that SIUE has the capacity to be a center of excellence and a national model of what an anti-racist higher education institution looks like, feels like, how it operates. And when I think particularly about the sort of collective vision that's unfolding, the brilliance of the folks that are on our campus, I just think there's so much work that we could do together. And so for me, the greatest opportunity, and I'm especially thinking about this as today is the 9th month of being in this position and sort of putting together the foundational pieces for this division, I think the greatest opportunity is in collaboration and partnership across the campus, and bringing the collective skills and talent and wisdom that I know is here to bear on this really critical and challenging work. But I would also say to do that in full agreement and with a full, robust dedication to changing the institution at the core. Like, this can't just be surface level, checking box sort of work. It has to be root deep, and it's definitely multi-layered and will take some time. But I think we have to dedicate ourselves collectively to making sure we do all that we can to make sure that SIUE is a more just, anti-racist, equitable, inclusive, and diverse campus. In terms of resistance, and this is really at the forefront of my mind, because SIUE is in the midst of a number of transitions and changes. I mean, this week we just announced the pending appointment, pending board approval of our next chancellor. And so that's a major shift that is about to occur. And in terms of resistance, I think sometimes we often consider external forces or there's something outside of ourselves. But I think, oftentimes we can stand in our own way and stand in the way of progress. And so I think our downfall as we continue to move forward would be to default to fear, to default to tradition and doing things as we've always done them, to default to being selfish and territorial, and this is mine, because none of this belongs to us. And at the end of the day, it's about the students, and it's about the pursuit of what's right and pursuit of justice. And so I think we all have to step up and do what it is that we say we are committing to. And so, we're not here by ourselves, we have each other. So I think it's important to tap into that, thinking back to my earlier comments about, history and understanding and knowledge, we have to work together to start to wrap our minds around the work it is that we have to do, one piece at a time, put some thought and strategy into, how it is that we address these various issues and problems, align resources in ways that support those strategies and goals that we develop together, and just push forward. And I think if we do all of those things, we'll be well on our way to becoming a truly anti-racist institution.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Well said. So 2 words that I heard to wrap up what you were speaking to was institutional integrity. Like, it's going to take all of us collectively to be on the same page to make sure that we don't just engage in meaningless platitudes, but that our words and our actions are aligned. So thank you for sharing that. That was very wise and beneficial. Dr. Ruiz, law school, same question.
I'll make this quick. Most of the things have been talked about. I mean, the barriers hopefully are your best opportunities, right? So it's resources, it's money, people, time. That's usually what keeps us from doing what we want to do. On the money front, our dean and our CDO have been out talking to alums and trying to raise money for specific DEI initiatives and projects. And I'm not going to let the president and the VC off the hook. If I give you my budget purpose number, you guys can send us some money to do some more things. But we need to be creative about ways that we can, get money to the people on this call and other people who are doing this work, so they don't have that barrier. People, you heard already talked about. We need to expand our list of accomplices, right? So, I'm proud of the fact that our faculty did an anti-racist statement and put it on the web, and they did it on their own. Our students created a diversity committee of their student bar association, have been meeting and forming new RSOs on their own. And so we need to be using the people at our disposal and using the infrastructure at our disposal. Sometimes a barrier is because you want to do something new, right? So as was mentioned earlier, use the existing classes, existing structure, whether it's University 101 or the classes within your department to advance the objectives you're trying to make. And then time, wow. Time is probably one of the biggest problems, as the VC mentioned earlier. And I think probably the only way basically to counteract the time element is to be more, and since this is a system-wide call, to be more mindful about what everyone else is doing. So I'm glad to hear that the system office is thinking about doing some initiatives system-wide. That will save us some time. The more we can have these calls and figure out what other people on campus are doing, so we don't duplicate and do the same thing, that'll save us some time. So more of these calls, more talking, more sharing. So we're all not, so where we can save time by working collectively. That's all I got.
Great, thank you, Dean Ruiz. And like you said, I just want to reinforce that is the goal of what we're doing today, is really making sure that we are being efficient with people, time, and resources. And so we're going to continue along that theme. As I look at the time, we're getting close to 1 o'clock, and I want to make sure that we do stay on task. I do want to ask a final question for our panelists before we transition to questions from our audience members. And I will ask for us to keep our responses to about maybe 1.5 minutes so we can, make sure that we engage our audience members. So if every panelist, starting with Dr. Elamine, if we can just provide one example of how you will work with campus constituents to move anti-racism from theory to sustained practice and policy in the School of Medicine. If you could just share one example of how you plan to do that, to work with your leaders on campus.
I'll give you a very specific example that has already happened. One of the things that we're seeing is that we now have chairs that are creating positions for VP of anti-racism, equity, diversity, inclusion within departments, so that even if that chair changes, that position is there to be able to do the work, to hold the metrics, and to be able to look at the organizational analysis and do that training. And this is going to help us to really sustain our work long-term. And having the finances and the policy in place and the position that's sitting at the table of leadership, that's something that I would say has been an example that has worked here at SIU School of Medicine in some of our departments.
Thank you for that. It's an excellent example that we can imitate. Now I'm going to actually switch back to Dean Ruiz. If you could share about a specific example for the School of Law.
Yeah, 2 things I would love to do. And since we've got the president and the VC on, this can now happen. All right, number one, we talk a lot about training and how we can, change people's minds. It seems to me we've got 2 excellent schools and colleges of education within the system on the Edwardsville and Carmondale campus that can help us figure out what the best ways are to do the persuasion, do the education that is sorely needed in this area. So I would like to reach out to those 2 colleges, school and that college, for their help. We talked about changing policy. We have a public policy institute headed up by Mr. Shaw. And I would love to create the law school to have a lab with them to help departments and colleges draft the policies, draft the rules, the regulations, the the laws that are needed, maybe even at the state level. It would be great to have a project with the Institute that we could then effectuate that kind of change. And that's the end of my wish list for now. It's not supposed to be my wish list. This isn't early Christmas here, but I got the president on the call, so I got to do it.
Yeah, why not, right? I agree with that. Capitalize, take those opportunities when you can. But we want to hear more about that, Dean Royce, because we are interested in supporting that type of innovation. So thank you for sharing that. Now I'm going to move over to Dr. Harris, if you could share.
Sure. There are a number of things I could talk about, but one of the things at the forefront of my mind right now concerns galvanizing the campus's support behind our quality initiative. And so in June of 2021, the Higher Learning Commission, which is our institutional accreditor, approved our quality initiative proposal, which is going to focus on improving retention and graduation rates of Black students. And the choice to center this particular area in the quality initiative is the result of the work of our anti-racism task force. But as mentioned earlier, the data tells a story and the data informs the actions and the decisions. And so the data revealed that we have a lot of work to do in this area of supporting retention, graduation, and overall well-being for Black students at SIUE. So I look forward to working with folks across the campus and getting this off the ground very soon, and certainly in close collaboration with our provost, Denise Cobb, and our associate provost, Elza Brosheva, who are also part of leading the effort.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Harris. Yeah, I love that example, and I'm hoping that we will duplicate more of that, where we can look at the data and align it institutional-wide. Like you said, accreditation, that now that's a focus, and that is another area of accountability for the entire college to say, we're focused on retention. We see that specifically. There's an issue with African Americans retaining and graduating, and now we have this lens that everybody is working towards to progress and to see those numbers shift in a positive direction. So great example, and we would like to see more of that. Dr. Thomas, if you can also share.
Okay, some of the things that that we plan to do or we are doing is we have a committee, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee that meets monthly. And this is composed of our students and faculty and staff. What we do is present ideas as we come together. Those ideas go to our executive council, and we develop some projects. One of the projects that we have going right now is we have a student that came to me. He's from Ghana, and his idea was for dental products or and even glasses that we can send to orphanages and the elderly in Ghana. And when he presented that, I said, well, that's a good idea. And what we proposed is we had all of our folks, as far as on the dental community, our Student National Dental Association, our Student Council, our women's dentists, all the fraternities, our SIU academic sports dentistry, our Christian group, our SPIA group. In other words, to make this an inclusive kind of project where it's not just one group that's doing this, but all of us. And that's going pretty well. We're gearing up some things. We've got some. I've got the mask right here that we're presenting. This is like everybody has to wear a mask for COVID, and this is the color of Ghana and that. So we're gonna do that and sell these, and just create some fundraising kind of things that we can do together to with a spirit of community and that sort of thing. So we've got some ideas, we're moving them forward, and we're including everybody in that endeavor. So that's just one of the things. But basically, we just want to talk about the things that we need to do, not just talk about them, but let's just start doing some things and do it as a collective community.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's a superb idea, just to make those meaningful connections, just to get people together to serve, and to, and again, I think that's another way to combat anti-racism. We talked specifically about strategies, and what does it look like to bring people together to serve others and to do those type of meaningful projects. So that's another great example. Thank you for sharing that. And now, Dr. Frazier, if you can provide just an example as far as how you will work with campus constituents to move anti-racism from theory to sustained practice and policy on the Carbondale campus.
Well, I think for me, I could name a couple of incidents where you just need to understand people's why. And so in working with those constituents, you need to have some listening for your own understanding. I heard a long time ago that I only have one mouth and two ears for a reason. And so I need to be able to utilize that to my advantage and listen to their points of view, but then also create those opportunities to gather some understanding, because they may not understand policies or procedures. They may not understand time and sequence. And then we come to an agreement on how we move forward. Because I want to be able to support them, and I want them to be able to have a voice. But we need to do things in a timely manner, and we need to do things in a civil manner. I think about our incident we're having right here, that we need to make sure that we're doing things in a civil manner.
Well, thank you for that. I would find your solution to be very strategic oriented, and I just want to remind everyone listening today that we are here to listen and to engage with all of you. We don't have the answers, and we are very interested in the solutions you have and what you have to say. And that's from all parties. It's not just from students or faculty of color. We are interested in solutions from every angle. And so I just want to say we are here to listen. I would say that as a part of our job description. So thank you for pointing that out, Dr. Frazier. And then I would actually just like to have Dr. Brown give her the final say on this particular question. If you could just share specifically about what you're doing in the athletic department, working with campus constituents to bring anti-racism from theory to sustained practice and policy.
Okay, thank you. Well, if anybody know me, they know that my philosophy is nothing happens outside of a relationship. And one of the things that we're doing here in athletics now that's really exciting is we're talking about our relationship with each other. How do we build a cohesive relationship within our department? Our athletic director have taken us through the book. If you're familiar with Great Mondays, we're having conversations here. We're having visioning sessions to strengthen our sense of self as a department, and also living out our purpose, and what it means to be in it to win it in all areas of athletics across the board, but all areas of our lives. And one example that I'm using is utilizing organizational community change model that Howard Ross talks about in his book, Reinventing Diversity. How do we take some of those different changes? How do we begin to create a shift in our consciousness and building trust, having some departmental discovering what are our areas? How can we grow? And what the most thing important to us is that we recognize as a community that we're stronger together, and that we really, really buy into that relationships matter. And we have to continue to talk to each other and trust each other. And we're building and we're doing that. And it's a lot of fun. So I think the most important thing is nothing happens outside of a relationship.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, for that reminder. I agree with that. We do need to strengthen and fortify relationships as well as build new ones. So thank you for that. Okay, so I appreciate all the panelists for answering those prepared questions. I think I personally learned a lot, and I really thank you for your time and engagement with that. And now we are going to transition to our Q&A session with our audience members. And at this point, I actually have not received a lot of questions, but I do want to start with the question that we have received. And if you all could bear with me, it's a bit detailed, and I am going to try to summarize it a little bit. So this is an anonymous question, and there's a statement as well as a question in it. And so the person who asked that there are 15 registered student organizations that are titled Black or African American. Some will be acceptable to leave as is. But so the question is, why do we not have organizations that are similar that start with the word white. Like there are no white registered student organizations, and they would like to know why is that? And then also, why not remove all references of race and make this a truly anti-racist university? And they suggest that maybe we can use the word cultural society instead of Black or African American or Latinx or Asian, any titles that exclude others. I also appreciate the person who asked the question because they acknowledge that historically clubs have always been predominantly white. They say clubs have been predominantly white and others did not feel like they belong. However, we are a progressive university, and now we should embrace all races, sexual orientations, etc., and prohibit anything that excludes others simply by the title based on their ethnicity. So basically, they're asking, why do we not get rid of organizations that have that's race-based? And so I would like to open it up to the panel. Why do we have organizations that say African American, Latinx, Asian, and not organizations that have white as the prefix? So someone could address that, if we can have panelists address that question. Why is there a need for Black organizations or race-based organizations on campus?
I can start. So identity-based student organizations, whether it be Hispanic student organizations, Black student organizations, are important for one of the reasons, identified in the question, this recognition that, historically, organizations have not always been particularly inclusive or welcoming to students of colors, or perhaps those holding marginalized identities. So I think identity-based student organizations serve an important role in terms of supporting the particular students' self-identity development, but also their leadership development. A lot of these organizations are platforms and mechanisms for students to advocate for themselves and to give voice to matters that are of particular concern to their identity groups. And at the same time, they also support belonging and building a sense of community, which I think is critical to their ability to thrive on campus. But as to this point about them being exclusive, I would presume that if, one were to take a look, at the bylaws of these organizations, and the process by which they became a registered student organization, their membership would not be exclusive, and that all would be welcome. And in fact, if that were not the case, I imagine there would be some serious legal implications and other implications for that. So yeah, that's my response to the question.
Appreciate you pointing out that even if groups are identity-based, that all are welcome. That's something that needs to be said. And I would like to invite other panelists who might also would like to respond to that. Do we have other panelists who would like to make additional comments?
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Harris as it relates to the importance of affinity groups, building that community, especially with individuals that have historically and are contemporarily being marginalized. I'm reminded of a game that I implement in my course, and I have also utilized during some of our impact training at SIUE, and it's the Monopoly game analogy. And so in this particular game, I have volunteers to be a part of the game, and one individual based on their name is excluded in some sense. And so I have them to, we talk about the rules that if you go around and you pass go, you collect $200. And so everyone gets a chance to go around that particular, the board, simulating it 349 times, excluding this other individual based off of their name or based on their name. And so the rules then change and we start to have equality. And so now that individual is able to collect $200, but we see the inequities in the amount of money individuals who have been able to go around 349 times have in comparison to the individual now who's able to collect money. And so I use that particular analogy just to help us to see that even during this time that we are moving to becoming an anti-racist institution, and we're hoping to have more equitable processes. It's really about equity. And so if we were to get rid of or allow organizations that have traditionally been focused on creating this community for marginalized individuals, we would be just doing them a disservice, because they are those individuals that have unfortunately been quite slighted going around the monopoly game for hundreds of years. And so I just wanted to share that particular analogy to help answer that question.
Thank you, Dr. Harris and Dr. Butler. Those were great responses. And I would just simply also say that one of the things that might be helpful, when I originally saw the question, it made me really ask questions. Like, I wanted to ask, like, what are the implications of having clubs for years? And I think Dr. Butler just spoke to that, of having clubs that have been traditionally all white. I think another question I had is, why is there a need for African Americans, Latinx, Asians to feel like they need to have these clubs? So those are some of the other questions that I think might be helpful to ask. And I think the third question would be, what is the purpose and what is the origin? So typically, if you had organizations historically that were all white, and not just on the SIU campus, for example, but even throughout society, the purpose was to exclude people who were not of the majority group. Oftentimes, these groups, the purpose is not to exclude or even to be inequitable with power structures, but it's to create a sense of belonging. It's for people to have those spaces where they can process with others different experiences that they have. There's a lot of data showing how people from racialized ethnic backgrounds, when they go to majority campuses, how they feel isolated, they feel excluded, they feel misunderstood. So these organizations are a place to gather, to be understood, to help them to persist, to thrive, and to graduate. I would even argue that instead of maybe thinking about neutralizing or decreasing, we may even need more, because when we look at our campuses, I think about a point that Dr. Harris made earlier with the data and how we're looking at low retention rates really on both campuses, even though I think a lot, Carbondale, Edwardsville, our campuses are definitely headed in the right direction with graduation rates and retention. That is an issue for us across the board with our populations for racialized ethnic groups. So one of these things that clubs and organizations do is that they actually allow students to see, if I come to your campus, I have a place of belonging, I have people who are going to understand me, who are going to help me persist. So I would suggest that these organizations actually strengthen the campus, and they strengthen opportunities for people to be able to make it through. When they don't necessarily see each other. I can think about a conversation I had with a student of color who said in their particular major, they were the only person of color in their major. I remember getting a 5-page letter prior to our last conversation of understanding about a student in one of our graduate programs and how isolated she felt in her particular program and how the curriculum didn't reflect her experiences. And so again, I'm sharing these stories because collectively they do tell a story. The data tells a story that we really need to create more spaces for a sense of belonging until we get to a place of equality. So our work, as we do anti-racism work, is to make right and to act right and to do right. And for us to make right and to do right, we cannot discount things that have happened historically. We have to embrace it. We have to look it in the eye. We have to confront it, and we have to do things to mediate it. So that's anti-racism work. So we can't ignore any of that or dismantle until we get to a place where there is equality. And I wish that that was not the case. I would love for us to be able to say cultural society, but until we can make changes and have a less racist society, we're going to have to progress to that point. So ultimately, the person who asked that question, that's the goal, but we're not there yet. And we have a lot of work to get there. And I think we have time for one more question before we turn it over to Dr. Mahoney for closing remarks. So the question is, anti-racism was defined by the School of Medicine as the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, practices, attitudes, behaviors, and speech so that power and authority is redistributed and shared equitably. And I would also like to say that is the definition that the system office has adopted as well. So if equity becomes the primary driver of redistributing power and authority, how will we prevent discrimination against people who don't have the ethnic background that is being sought at a particular time? In other words, how do we make sure that we don't fight discrimination with more discrimination? So I guess they're concerned that at some point, the imbalance or the power structure will shift to disadvantage others who we're not focused on at this point. And if I could be even more direct, it's like if it's to basically redistribute power, they're saying that at some point will the majority group probably become marginalized or disadvantaged. I think that's, to me, that's the question. Unless somebody else hears something differently, I would invite others based on what I just read. It was my first time reading the question.
You know, the first thing that came to my mind is what we do in admissions at the medical school is that we have holistic review. It's not based upon numbers alone or your MCAT scores. It's holistic review, saying that you will take every person's experience, past experiences, how that has gotten them to this place, what they have done in their lives around community service. And that system actually opens up the door for everybody, not just those that have been marginalized or have been minoritized. It actually has influenced our ability to bring in diversity of ideas, diversity of experience, more individuals that are from rural communities, and have kept us in alignment with our mission. So that's one of the things that comes to my mind is that when I find that when you're addressing things by looking at the power structures and you remove some of those barriers, all boats start to come up, not just some boats, and it benefits everybody. I've been on admissions for several years, and I have seen that time and time again, that it is not one group that is benefiting.
I agree with Dr. Alameen. I think that happened for us here at SIU when we looked at our Meridian Scholars Program. When you remove some of those barriers, it becomes diverse just by removing some of the barriers of how we were doing things. And so I think that's a struggle for people. When you do remove some of the barriers that has historically eliminated certain people in groups.
I like to add to that, and that's a great example, Dr. Alameen, because we do the same thing at the dental school. And I was on a committee for the American Dental Education Association that looked at admissions committees and what they need to do to achieve diversity. And one school in particular, I won't say the name, but they literally had a table, and they were all white men at this table, where they met. And when the other folks came in, they were sitting in chairs or around the table, but they weren't at the table, And like I had mentioned earlier, as far as don't lower standards, lower barriers, but at our admissions committee, we look at what we're doing, we review the things that we've done last year, but for our students to achieve, we look at where they've gone to school, their lows, their hours, maybe if they've done things to overcome obstacles, if they've been in multiple things, different clubs or other things that they've done to really reach out into the community and that sort of thing. Because we can all, there's some of the students that don't make it, that don't cut it and other things aren't it could be the ones that had great DATs, great MCATs, great grades, but for whatever reason, they died on the vine. They came here and you couldn't teach them anything. They're not willing to learn, and they just want to make shortcuts and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, you want to do things where it's all equal and give everybody a chance, give them a fighting chance to show what they can do to achieve. And we're not the only school in town. I mean, we're in Alton, Illinois, and it's not Chicago or anything like that, but we've got a great school here. Our students make it, they achieve, they are able to go out and serve our mission and do the things that we want them to do. And that's all our students. So those are the type of things that we try to do to keep things going.
Thomas. And I just want to reinforce what you said. I do think it's important to clarify the definition for others who might also read this, because we specifically say that so that it is redistributed and shared equitably. So the goal is to make sure that we are elevating everyone. I think part of our approach to this work is not a scarcity mindset, so that we don't necessarily believe that only certain people can have, as Dr. Elamine spoke to, as well as Dr. Thomas and Dr. Brown, we believe that this work elevates all of our constituents, and that it's not going to disadvantage some while it's disadvantaging others. We use the word underrepresented a lot. We often don't use the word overrepresented. So we acknowledge that there are some people who don't have any share of the pie. And then even in Dr. Thomas' example, you have a certain group, and it's exclusive to race and gender. You just have white men, for example, in the example he shared. So then you would have to ask, where are the women, where are the people of color who actually get to sit at the table and who's not around the table, which means they are on the margins of the table. So what does it look like to have some people sitting outside and in representation at the table? And I think that is really what we mean if you want to have that visual for equity, that we are not trying to disadvantage, but we want to elevate everyone, and we don't want others overrepresented and some underrepresented. So the goal is for us all to collectively be advantaged in the work that we do. And so that, again, I just wanted to clarify that definition and what our aims are as we do anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So again, I just want to thank the panelists for this very robust discussion. And I also want to thank Dr. Mahoney, who is always with us. He's been a great support to me since I've been here, and he's been very committed to anti-racism, diversity, and equity and inclusion work. And now I will turn it over to you as you share thoughts before we conclude today.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Caldwell, and I'll thank the panel as well. And I'll just try to summarize kind of what I think I heard today from all of the panelists. The first thing I think that stood out was the need for knowledge and understanding. And that is multiple parts to that. I think, Dr. Butler talked about data and metrics and focusing on, measuring things so we understand kind of where we are. But we also talked a lot about history and how we got to this point. And as somebody who teaches history, I always say you can't understand what's going on today if you don't understand what happened 50 years ago, what happened 100 years ago. And I always say too, history includes yesterday. So history can also be very contemporary to things that are happening right now. What this all means when we're talking about anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, Dr. Frazier talked about, coming together and defining those terms, because often those terms are misdefined. I sometimes, watch things on social media or other places, and people define those terms in ways I do not recognize at all. And so I think coming to an understanding of what that really means is important. I think looking at our policies and procedures, so people talked about that and the impact of those policies and procedures. And then as Mr. Rees talked about problem solving, how do we change those to make it better? And I will say in any institution, higher education included, change is hard. We've all worked in higher education for a long time. We've all heard, we've always done it this way, more times than we care to remember. And so we understand that change is difficult and sometimes takes time, but really the knowledge and understanding is really to build us towards effective change and action and doing things differently. And deep change is particularly important. And that change will sometimes take more time, frankly, than I would like. I get frustrated. I like to move things more quickly, but I understand deep change takes time, and deep change is sustainable. I heard that as well, as we want change that's just not for today, but that's sustainable change. And then we want to hold people accountable for changing what they're doing, which again, sometimes brings us back to the metrics. And everyone can be involved. Today, we heard from the leaders across our system who are very much involved with the diversity, equity, inclusion work every single day. But as Dr. Butler talked about, we also need accomplices. We need other people to be engaged in this. And that includes faculty, staff, and someone mentioned particularly students. The students often come up with really fantastic ideas. Sometimes I hear criticism of this generation of students. I don't know who they're talking about, because every time I talk with them, I'm more invigorated to really move forward and make substantial change. And I thought the question was interesting too about even getting involved in different organizations. I've been a member of the NAACP for about 5 years now. I'm not a person of color, but I've certainly been embraced by that organization, even had a leadership role at one point. We all can get involved a lot more than we probably realize that we can. And ultimately, our goal is, I think, and Dr. Caldwell talked about this, creating a better community, better institutions, a better university system, a better country, where everyone feels, as Dr. Thomas talked about, welcome, and everybody has a sense of belonging, that this is their institution and their place. And that's really ultimately what our goal is. And I remain optimistic. And part of the reason I remain optimistic is the people that we have here on the panel, the leaders. We have the right leaders to make this type of change, but also the depth of talent. Several people talked about that. And I was at the SIUE Black Faculty and Staff Association, looking across the group that I was talking to, just makes me feel more optimistic about where we're headed as an institution and as a university system. So again, thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you to all of you who joined us online, and I hope to continue to have these conversations going forward. The next one, I believe Dr. Carl will be in February. So we'll have them in February, March, and April. We'll continue with these conversations going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you, everybody. I learned so much every time we have these, so I appreciate you all.